How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? I hope you're having a great day, and today we're here with a video about the Tier 8 Heavy Tank Weakspots. I know this series has been doing pretty well on my channel so far. I'm just trying to help you guys learn a bit more about some of the weak spots that I know personally, and then hopefully you guys can actually learn a bit as well, and maybe give me some tips as to how to take some of the tanks that I might have missed out of the video. So we're going to get straight into it. So we're starting with the US Tier 8 Heavy Tanks. So that'll be the T32, and then we'll move on to the Premium Tier 8, the T34. Now let's go straight onto the armor model. As you can see, the main strength of this tank is the turret armor, with a huge amount of turret armor. It's even better I would say, than the M103 realistically. The armor is so much more solid. There's a very small cupola that is still really strong, to be honest with you, and quite a small target to actually hit. So the main weak spots of this one are, there's this little like gun turret type area here which you can pen, which is slightly less than the rest of the tank on the upper hull. Or there's the lower plate, which isn't really that much weaker than the upper plate. It's just that it's angled a bit more, so you're going to be able to pen either one really. Obviously the side of the hull is really weak, and it will absorb heat rounds though, due to this big spaced armor as usual with the American tanks, unless you hit this area just above where you've just got 76mm of armor. The side of the turret is really strong, so I wouldn't recommend ever shooting at the side of it, even if you do get this rear bit of the turret as well, because it just could troll you and bounce, and it's just not worth it, especially if you can get this bit. Otherwise, if you can only see the turret, aim for the rear half, which pokes out from the main center bit, because that is the weaker bit. And then when we look at the rear of the tank, obviously it's very weak, because frontal armor on American tanks is generally quite good, except from when you come around the rear, where it starts to become pretty garbage, and the side of the tanks are usually pretty crap as well, I'm not going to lie. So rear turret, don't want to be shooting there if you can avoid it, but the rear of the actual hull of the tank, this bit here, can be penned by pretty much anything, and if you've got a big gun with high heat HE penetration, then you'll be able to go through it quite easily. And that is the T32 really. There's no real frontal weak spots in terms of the turret, so it's only really this small cupola here where you're going to need quite high penetration anyway. Otherwise you want to be hitting this bit here, or just aiming anywhere if you've got penetration of above about 185, and you'll be alright. And then if it's angling, you can actually hit this area here where it slopes on the engine deck, and you can actually pen that, especially in close quarter situations. If it's angling, you can actually pen that quite often, and that's a weak spot with the American really heavy tanks right the way through up to the tier 10. So we'll go back and actually have a look at the T34. Obviously there's also the mutant as well, which we're going to be having a look at in a minute. Here is the T34. Yet again, the hull armor is pretty dreadful on this thing, and there's this huge kind of machine gun port, which is very weak at around 80mm of armor. So if you've pretty much tier 7s, tier 6s even can pen this if they can see this area here and they know that the weak spot is there. So you want to be aiming for that. The upper hull is actually pretty weak, to be honest with you, as with most American hull armor at tier 8. And then you've got the lower plate, which is even weaker, so you want to be aiming there, and it's not similar to the T32, which has pretty similar on the upper plate and the lower plate, but it's actually considerably weaker on the lower plate on the T34. And one other thing is you've got this cupola on top, which you can actually hit, although it is quite troll and bouncy, and it seems to be a bit off center when you're looking at it. But you do want to kind of aim for this if that's all you can see, and you have a chance to actually penetrate. But otherwise I wouldn't recommend challenging this if it gets hulled down. When you come around to the side, it's weak, 76mm of armor. Don't hit the spaced armor, which is the tracks, and try and pen with heat, because it's going to get absorbed once again. Don't fire HE at the side because it's going to get absorbed. and you want to aim for the kind of front drive wheel or the rear drive wheel, and actually pen at the same time to track it and maintain your ability to keep on doing damage to the side of the tank rather than it turning round and putting some shots into you, since its alpha damage is pretty high but the reload is terrible on this thing, really low DPM. So what you want to do is, if you get the side of it, you can aim for the hull, or you can actually just hit the side of the turret, which is around 127mm of armor, which is considerably weak, so you'll be able to pen that. When you come around to the rear of the tank, however, you don't want to hit this big area on the back, because it is actually much stronger than the side of it actually. So you've got upwards of 203mm of armor on this rear bit of the turret, and you don't want to be hitting that. So aim for the kind of rear of the tank, the upper rear of the tank, which might be kind of a bit weird, but the actual lower bit of the tank is actually really well angled, and it can even produce some bounces if you don't aim your shot right. So make sure to aim at the top bit of the tank here, and that is the T-34. So we'll hop back out and have a look at the Mutant, or the M6A2E1. This is another premium tier 8 heavy tank. It's got a lot stronger armor on the hull though, so it certainly can put in some shifts. However, the top of the turret is weaker, kind of similar to that of the M103 in terms of the strengths of the tank. So the turret armor is actually the weaker bit of the tank. So when you're facing this thing head on, it's quite tall, it's got a high profile, and it's quite a big target. So if you've got premium rounds that are upwards of 230, 240mm of penetration, then I would definitely advise trying to hit the most kind of areas like that, where it's 230 on these side bits, or because otherwise this middle bit is a bit more strong, so it's stronger even. Sorry about my English there, that was pretty terrible. But you want to hit this area here, which is something that you want to do. Or if you can see the turret, then you can definitely hit this area here, where it's really quite weak, and there's a big kind of area here where the cupola is sloping down, and it gives you a much easier target. So if you can hit that, then it's definitely advised, especially if you can see it. And then the side of the tank becomes supremely weak. Yeah, again with the Americans, you can see that there's kind of some traits going on, although traits aren't a thing in the game apparently, but nation traits, that is, they're not a thing apparently, but I don't know. I don't think Wargaming are telling the truth 100% there. So as you can see on the side of the turret, it's got 89mm of armor, so you want to, if basically any tier 8 will pen that. And then the lower bit is only 66mm of armor, so hit the upper bit of this, not the tracks, because that also has spaced armor of 25mm, which can add to the ability to bounce really. And then if you add the tracks in some places, it can come up to 111mm of effective armor, which could be challenging some tier 7's penetration. So make sure you're hitting the upper bit of this area here. You'll be able to see it in game because the tracks are there, and then you want to hit above the tracks. And then when it comes to the rear of the tank, do not fire at the rear of the turret, because it's just not worth it. I would recommend firing at the engine deck, which is quite badly sloped, and you're going to be able to pen that with HE and quite reliably set them on fire. As with the American tanks, that is quite a thing that happens, and artillery are going to have an absolute field day if they come above this and just smack it. 25mm of armor, you'd be very lucky to bounce any shots from above, except if it hits your upper plate. So make sure to fire HE at this area here. If you've got 33mm, 36mm of pen or more, and if you're going to fire at the rear, make sure you've got 50 plus to ensure that you're going to pen. You don't want to get around the back of it, fire one, realise you've only done like 100 damage, and then it start turning its armor towards you, and you're going to struggle a lot more. So that is the Mutant, or the M6A2E1. Sorry about that. So we're going to move on to the British tanks now, which is the Caernavon, I believe, is the tier 8 heavy tank from the British line. So here we go. I don't know that this has the best turret. I don't know. I think it does. I think it's fully upgraded. So as you can see, it's got a pretty decent turret, to be honest with you. A pretty troll one. As you can see, it's probably around 230 millimeters in most places, and there's the bit just above the gun where it's actually 180. So if you can hit there, then you're most likely going to actually pen. And there's this big cupola on top that you can pen as well, quite reliably, if you don't tend to have enough pen to be able to go through the hard lost places like that. Otherwise, you can hit the lower plate of this, since it's only 109 millimeters of armor, and even the upper plate is pretty much a reliable pen from most tier 8 heavy tanks and tank destroyers, so they're going to be able to go through that quite reliably. Then you come to the side of the tank. It is very, very weak, around 50 millimeters of armor. You've got the spaced armor though, which could be troll if you're firing heat, which is going to absorb it. Remember, this is a constant thing. I'm just trying to help anyone that really doesn't understand what heat is and how it works. So make sure you aim for the upper bit of the armor where there isn't any spaced armor, since spaced armor does absorb heat rounds and HE as well. So make sure you're aiming at this once again. Then the side of the turret, I wouldn't aim at that unless that is all you've got been given. And then make sure to aim for this bit. Don't aim for the cupola, because that is actually stronger than the side armor is actually. And then we come to the rear of the tank. Now this is somewhere where you can easily pen with HE. Make sure you do that if you can, and you're going to be dealing some very, very nice damage when you come up against the ass of a Caernavon. And that is pretty much what the British tier 8 heavy tank actually gives to us. Now I think that is it for the British line. I can't see any more. Then we're on to the German heavy tanks, which there are, I believe, 3 of them. So we've got the VK4502A, the Tiger 2, and then the Lowe. VK4502A is actually quite well armored if you know how to angle. That's the thing. It's not so good if you're just on a frontal engagement with something like a Tiger 2, because you do not have the armor to bounce many of his shots unless you do angle like an angle like here, and he tries to hit your lower plate, which is actually really strong and much well angled than the upper plate. So when you come up against this thing, do not shoot the lower plate. It has a much stronger lower plate than it does an upper plate, so hit the upper plate. If you cannot pen the upper plate, then hit this little cupola here. Not cupola, it's like a machine gun port once again. And if you can hit that, then you need about 100 millimeters of armor. Penetration even to penetrate the armor. And then you've got the turret, which is actually kind of troll if you hit these side bits here or side bits here. But the kind of cheeks of the turret, you're going to be able to pen with 190 plus pen very reliably, so you want to be trying to aim for that bit. And then you've got the cupola on top and this area here, which you can pretty much just destroy quite a lot, and you're going to be able to pen a lot, and that is kind of something you want to be aiming for when you're coming up against this tank. Now when it comes to the side, it's actually not as bad as the American tanks or the British tanks, so it's got 84 to 83, kind of a decent amount of armor, depending on how you're hitting it when it's angled. But it's got 80 millimeters of actual armor, but obviously if it's angled slightly, it can improve a hell of a lot. So make sure you're getting it flat and firing just your normal rounds into it. You don't need premium, you don't need HE, because you're not going to pen reliably, and that's something you want to aim for. And then when it comes to the side armor of the VK4502A, then you want to be firing just standard again, 96 millimeters in some places, so you want to be able to reliably pen that, and making sure that you've got 100 plus pen will pretty much ensure that you're going to be dealing damage every single time. Now when it comes to the rear of the tank, it is actually pretty well armoured as well, so don't go firing HE at this rear of the tank unless you've got a very big gun with a lot of HE penetration, or HESH rounds from something higher tier, to be able to pen this and deal a bit more damage. But otherwise, then make sure you're just firing standard at the back of it. Don't try anything fancy with HE. and you'll have a nice day coming across this, since it is pretty good as a medium / heavy, but it's not necessarily that good when it comes down to a one-on-one engagement with a true heavy tank like the Tiger II. Now we're going to move on to the Tiger II now. So this is the other German heavy tank at tier 8. This leads on to the E100. The VK4502A actually leads on to the VK4502B and then onto the Mouse, whereas this leads on to the E75, then the E100. Now this has a lot more armor than the VK4502B, and it's a lot easier to actually bounce rounds with this thing. Although you've got to be very, very careful with the turret armor, since when you side scrape, the turret becomes very, very vulnerable, and people can pen this really reliably. So make sure that when you're actually facing people, that you're actually aiming straight at them when you're angling. So when you're angling, you want to be aiming at them like that, to just increase the chance of them bouncing. And one other bit, this has quite a few weak spots, to be honest with you. It's got this big lower plate, which is very weak, and the upper plate is pretty strong, so don't go firing at that unless you can't see the lower plate. Otherwise I would fire at the cupola, because if you can see the hull, then you can pretty much see the turret anyway. So aim for the cupola if you can't see the lower plate. And then if it angles like slightly towards you, the side of the turret is very, very weak. 100mm of armor, but it becomes so unangled when they start angling their hull armor against you. So make sure you're firing at that if they're angling kind of away like this. So if aiming straight at you, then they angle but leave their turret in the same position, you can pen really quite easily. And when you come around the side of it, yet again, try and aim for the bit here with standard ammo, not heat, and try and track it as well as dealing damage. Make sure that you're not hitting the very, very back of the tracks, because that will only track them and you won't be dealing damage. So try it a bit further over to the left, and make sure that you can see that it's going to hit the bit behind the tracks and deal damage. Otherwise, the side armor inside the turret are pretty much the same, although the hull armor is actually slightly weaker when it comes down to the angling of the armor, etc. So when it comes actually round to the rear, you've actually got quite a bit more armor on the back of it, because it's sloped. It's a lot sloped than the side armor. As you can see, it's got a slight sloping here, whereas the rear of the tank actually has quite a harsh sloping there. But I would definitely, if you come around behind it, try and aim for the back of the turret. If you haven't got securely over 100mm of pen, I would, and even if you didn't 95mm, 98, you know, upwards of 95, you can still pen really quite reliably the back of it, but it's getting to that dodgy region. I know when I'm talking about 100mm of pen, it's probably like tier 8 standard, or not tier 8, tier 7, and then even tier 6s with a decent gun can pen that quite reliably as well. So make sure that you can see the back of the turret if you're going to fire anything at the back of the tank, since there is this sloping. And that is the Tiger II. Onto the Lowe. I know this is kind of quite fast paced and I'm trying to whip right the way through it, but I'm kind of trying to appeal to all of those people who just want to know one tank weak spot, and I'll put all of the timestamps in the description below to try and just help you guys find the tank that you're struggling with, and therefore you can do a bit more, be a bit more effective. You don't want to be spending the whole video trying to find out where the tank that you're going to be using is. So we're here straight onto the Lowe. Now when it comes to the Lowe, the armor profile is kind of weird. It's got some areas where they are very, very strong, and then it's got areas where it's slightly weaker, and then there's areas where it's actually quite weak in total. So this little area here, it's kind of like a bar type lower plate bit, is the weakest bit on the frontal armor, if you can have a look. Even the cupola is pretty strong, so I would aim for this bit here, and you're going to most likely pen. I think it got actually buffed on PC, so this might be the buff version, so it is probably even weaker on console, because I don't know that they buffed it at all. So this bit here is the weaker bit. Then you've got the upper plate, which is 200mm. Most tier 8 heavy tanks with standard might be able to go through this pretty reliably. However, you might need premium to be able to 100% go through it. with some tier 8 heavies. And considering this is a premium, it's actually a pretty strong one if you can play it right and make sure that you know kind of what the tank is good at and what it's actually bad at. I haven't got it myself, but I know people who have played it. I've played in it before around one of my friends, and it was definitely quite strong. So when it comes to the side armor, you can pretty much fire anywhere. Still got reasonably strong side armor when I think about it, but there are areas on the turret where you can actually just pen 83mm, since it's only 80mm of actual armor, but obviously the angling can affect that. So make sure you're aiming for the rear half of the tank, since it's got a lot stronger on the front, since there's plates where it's made it just stronger. And make sure you're aiming for this. As you get further away from the center of the middle of the turret, it gets progressively stronger and stronger until there's just an auto ricochet angle where you're not going to pen at all, really, even the biggest of rounds. And then you come to the rear of the tank. Now the rear of the tank is pretty strong compared to some of the other tier 8 heavy tanks that we've seen, like the British, the Americans, and that is kind of a case with the Germans. They tend to do that right the way through up to tier 10. With the Maus, the E100, they have really strong rear armors, and this has 90mm of effective armor, really. And then the back of the turret actually can be quite troll. There's this area here which is slightly weaker. It's kind of like a little hatch type area on the back of the tank, so it's slightly weaker than the rest of the tank when you're looking at it. So maybe try and aim for that rather than anything else. It's not necessarily weaker, but it's the area where there's the smallest amount of armor angling that there actually is on the tank. See, as you can see, it's 80mm around it, but then it gets stronger in this area, but it's the least angled bit of the back of the turret, so make sure you're trying to aim for there. And you should have a nice day coming up against a Lowe, since its gun is pretty alright, but then it's kind of a bit hit and miss, and most tier 8 heavy tanks can actually trade quite well with the Lowe. And that is it for the German heavy tanks. We'll go on to the French ones, although they're not really heavy tanks, if you get what I mean. They're more kind of medium style tanks, and they've just got troll armor where you can bounce sometimes, but overall this is pretty much a walk-in weak spot. You've got this lower plate which is pretty weak, but it's a very small target, so I wouldn't aim at it. Either the upper plate is pretty garbage, you can go through that anytime. The turret armor is pretty troll if you hit some areas, but I would just aim at the turret because it is the weakest bit overall. One area where you don't want to hit is the gun mantlet, so don't try and aim in at that or the gun. And you don't want to be pulling out in front of this when it's reloaded, because it can deal a hell of a lot of damage to you if you sit and it tracks you or whatever. So don't bother aiming at the cupola, because that is pretty strong anyway, and you'd be far better off just aiming for this area here, which is this big, like, kind of semicircular area here, and then comes down like this, and you just want to aim for this bit here, or even just the hull armor, since it is quite big and fat. And if it's trying to angle, then you can pen this side bit here, which is just nullifies the angling of this tank. And side of the tank is bloody garbage, 35mm of armor, and you're gonna need to just fire HE, because it is just gonna go through if you've got a decent amount of HE pen. Don't aim for the tracks yet again, please. It's just not worth it, the amount of time I've seen that happen, and I just want to reiterate that throughout this video. And then you've got 30mm at the rear, so there's the side armor is pretty much the same as the rear armor, except the side armor has 35, side armor of the hull has 35, and the rear armor actually has 30mm. Turret is the same right the way from the like kind of sides to the rear, so I would definitely recommend kind of aiming at just this fat hole of the tank. And that is the not the German, the French tier 8 heavy tank, they're right there. And we'll move on to the Russian. The Russians obviously have the more overpowered Tier 8 heavy tanks, in my opinion, this stupid IS-3, I don't know how it hasn't been balanced on console, or just somewhat just nerfed. I mean, the armour is just pretty troll. Even with the strongest of guns, you can end up bouncing off some of these trollish side armour, which just is fucking ridiculous. Like, I don't know how anything can have like 300mm on the side of the tank, so it's actually stronger than the fucking frontal of the tank. As you can see, I'm a bit salty from the IS-3. The amount of times I've come up against this thing in tanks that are just underpowered for their tier and just get absolutely wrecked. So one thing you want to be aiming for when you come up frontally with this tank is this lower plate of the pike nose. Now, it's shaped kind of like a... Let me go into a different kind of model, so we'll go into the visual model and you can see a bit better. So there's this pike nose where it comes down, and you've got this lower plate bit here which is weaker than the upper plate, as you can see. Although if it does angle towards you, you can pen this much more reliably. Don't aim for the lower plate if it angles towards you. And try and aim for the upper bit of this, where it's weaker than the frontal kind of lower bit of it. Don't shoot at the turret unless you can 100% see this area here, which I will go back to the collision model. As you can see, it's 26mm of armor, and you can pen that quite reliably, but if it RNG just gets you, you're going to be hitting the mantlet and not going to pen at all. And then this tiny cupola, I wouldn't aim for it. Fucking Russian tanks, just don't bother. But when it comes to the side of it, you've got the side of the turret armor, you got the side of the rear armor, 100mm, so you can aim for that. Don't hit this area just above the tracks, because that's 200mm of armor. You're going to need 200mm of penetration, since the armor is just so ridiculous. The 30mm of spaced armor just makes it so troll. So make sure you're aiming for the tracks with standard, or this tiny area. I wouldn't bother. Just go for between this spaced armor and the tracks here, as with the IS-7. And then you've got the rear of the tank, which is obviously an auto pen if you just make sure that you're aiming your shot and getting it in. Don't try and get this tiny bit here, which doesn't count as a hitbox, because it's just spaced armor. So make sure you're aiming for the center bit of the rear of the tank and the center bit of the rear of the turret, although the turret can be so troll, so don't aim for that if you can avoid it. That's the IS-3 then, so we're on to the STI. Not the STI, the KV4 now. Most people call this the KV Fortress because of the armor just being so well, not angled, but just so strong. It's just got so much armor all over the tank. And even the side is bloody ridiculous. And if you can angle it correctly, as you can see here, you've got bloody like 220mm pretty much all round, except from this bar on the front of the tank where it's slightly weaker at 180mm of armor and 160 here. But that's kind of a hard target to hit. What I do when I see this tank is press the A button, because I don't want to be bouncing shots off of this thing. There's the big cupola here, which is pretty weak if you hit this kind of bit in the front of the cupola. Don't try and aim for the side bits of it, because you will bounce, since its armor angle is just ridiculous. So aim for this big area flat on top of the tank. Otherwise, if you've got a decent pen, then you can aim for the kind of cheeks of it. Although I don't like aiming for cheeks, because if they move their turret slightly, it can just cause you to auto ricochet and it will just be annoying. There's areas on the front of it where there's like these machine gun port and kind of the driver hatch. Not driver hatch, but driver viewport, where you can actually penetrate if you can get your shots in like that. If you're aiming down on the tank, artillery could have a quite a nice field day, and the KV4 is quite a big target. It's slow moving, etc. So when you come up frontally, you've got this bit here, this tiny bar where it's flat. Don't aim anywhere else except from the viewport and the machine gun port. Side of the cheeks are weaker, and then the kind of cupola is also weak, which is a bigger target, and you're more likely to pen this than the cheeks, because it's wider and it's the same strength of armor. When you come to the side of it, you might think, oh, well, it's going to have terrible side armor. Nope, it's actually got 150mm of side armor, and all that is all over the tank. Don't aim for the cupola when you come around to the side, because it's actually better than the side of the turret or the side of the tank. I usually tend to, since it's a massive target, you can actually track it really easily and pen, so that's what I usually do. Go for the rear or the frontal drive wheel and just pen it, and then it's kind of a sitting duck. So the side of the turret are pretty weak, so you'll be able to go through that with like 150mm of pen. Plus, if you're a light tank driver, you want to come around behind it and just fire at the kind of rear of the hull. Don't try and aim at the turret, because especially not the cupola of the turret, since that is 150mm right the way round of the tank, I believe, except maybe the very front of it, which is 180. So there's this area where it's slightly weaker than the rest of it, 120mm on the back of the tank. So in my opinion, I would just aim at the hull. Otherwise, hit this area here where it's kind of this big plate of just weaker armor there. And that is the KV4. I believe there is the KV5 to have a look at as well, and then the IS6. So it's going to be quite a long video, to be honest with you, but it's going to include all of the Tier 8 heavy tanks weak spots that I can think of anyway. So first of all, we've got this cupola here, which is very weak. I believe it got a buff on PC, so the armor values might be quite different to what they actually are. So as you can see, it's got 140mm, although on console I believe it has weaker than that. So either way, they're weak spots in comparison to the actual armor of the rest of the tank. So aim for these big R2-D2 droids. On the front of the turret, it's got these big cupolas here. This one's not as strong. Well, it's stronger than this one here. So aim for this big circular kind of cake tin here, and you'll be able to pen. Don't go for the lower plate, since it's 200mm of armor and it's quite trolly, especially if it's angled. It's going to be bloody ridiculous. And then the top of the turret, you got the cupolas, which are weak. Aim for this, yet again, caked in here. Make sure you're aiming for that, not the cupola, since the cupola is really quite troll. You've got areas of auto bounces, etc. Then you come around to the rear of the tank. Not the rear, what am I on? The side of the tank even. Sorry, I've been talking for quite a long time already. And then you've got these areas on the side of the tank. It's 150mm of actual armor. So if you can hit that anywhere, you're going to be able to pen. And side of the turret I would not aim at unless that is all you can see, because it is quite troll. It's got a decent amount of side armor of the turret, and then make sure you're hitting this, trying to set it on fire by hitting the engine deck, and you're going to have a nice day there. And you come around to the rear of the tank. Make sure you're not auto aiming, because if you do, this bar here is where it auto aims onto. So this is the center of the back of the hull of the tank, so don't go auto aiming, because it's going to hit this and you're going to bounce if you're not paying attention. So try and aim when you come around to the rear of the tank on this bit here, or this bit on the lower bit, or if you've got definitely enough pen to be able to go for 180mm, then I would definitely recommend going for the back of the turret, since it is a guaranteed penetration if you have got that penetration in the first place, and it's a much bigger target, and you've not got a chance of just getting some troll armor where it's going to bounce on the back of it, since this plate here where it's stronger. And then now that is the KV5, we're going to check out the IS6, and then I believe that is it for the console version of WoT Tanks for the Tier 8 Russian premium heavy tanks. So let's get straight on to this. As you can see, the IS6 is quite a strange beast, to be honest. This lower plate is somewhere where you don't want to be hitting. Don't try and aim for that, since it's got quite well angled. It's got 53 degrees, and it's not going to be easy to pen. So I would recommend actually shooting the upper plate in areas where, not this bit here, since that is very, very strong, but these areas to either side of it, and this lower bit of the upper hull is where you want to be aiming, especially if you're since it's quite small, and like as in height wise, you can actually get up above it and shoot down onto this upper plate, so you're going to be able to pen a bit more reliably if you've got that height advantage over the IS6. There is of course these cupolas on top, however they are quite small targets, and if you can only see the turret, I would not recommend pushing this unless there's the kind of tank advantage against it. But even still, I would not recommend trading with this if it's hold down. Otherwise, I would try and get around the side of it where its armor is weakest. Although yet again with Russian side armor, it has got this big amount of spaced armor where it will absorb any heat rounds, it will absorb HE rounds, any sort of thing from heat or areas where spaced armor will absorb shots. So you want to aim for this top bit of the tank. Don't aim for this area which is angled here from the front of the hull. You want to aim for this rear half of it, and don't aim for this bit here because that has a ridiculous armor angle and you're going to bounce. Yet again, if you're kind of got the height advantage, you can actually shoot down onto the engine deck really reliably since it's only 20mm, and you're going to be able to pen that really reliably. Side of the turret is stronger, however I would not recommend shooting this unless you have got premium rounds loaded or you've got 200mm of plus of penetration. Then you're going to be able to go through it quite reliably. And then yet again you can try and track it and deal damage at the same time. Don't hit this very far back bit of the thing because you're only going to track it. You're not going to be able to do damage, so you want to aim just a bit further in from the tracks like edge, and you'll pen. Then when it comes to the rear of the tank, don't fire HE at this one since it's quite strong at the back. It's not within HE really range for a tier 8 tank, maybe a tier 10 with a big gun, and we'll be able to pen that quite reliably, or HESH rounds from higher tier tanks. And that is the IS-6 for you. I know it can be a struggle for any tier 6s that it comes up against, and it does get preferential matchmaking, so tier 9s will be able to quite easily ruin this, and if it decides to fail platoon with some tier 9 heavy tanks or whatever, it will get into a tier 10 matchup and it will get absolutely ruined because the armor doesn't count for shit in the game. And this tank has very bad kind of gun. It's not going to be able to pen you reliably at all. Now we're on to the Chinese tanks. So we've got the 110 at tier 8. Which is a different style of kind of tank. It's quite similar to the T10, except it's a bit squashed. It looks like it's kind of squashed up. However, these pike nose has a really strong, so you definitely want to be aiming for this lower plate bit below the pike nose, because since it's squashed, the armor angle is even better, and you're going to most likely bounce. So aim for that bit. Then the top of the turret, again, like the IS-3, it's got this pretty like terrible bit of armor on top where you're going to be able to pen if you can hit it, but I would definitely recommend going for the cupola on this one since they're a bit more prominent than the IS-3. Side armor is really quite weak. Don't aim for this bit at the front, try and aim for the back of the hull of the side of it. And then when you come around to the back, you've obviously got not very strong armor, so I definitely would recommend just firing normal into the back of it. It's not really, it's at that range where HE might not work as well. And then you've got the I think it's the 112 that is actually the heavy tank. I'm not 100% sure. That is in World of Tanks, obviously. I will have a look when the WZ-111 something comes into the game, which is another tier 8 Chinese premium heavy tank. So the 112 is just a version of the like IS-3 that doesn't have this pike nose. It just has the lower plate. And this is actually really strong tank if you can know how to play it. If you can angle, it's got some really nice areas, and it's got very few weak points. The only points really frontally are these cupolas here, which are 180mm, 160 on some of them. On this right hand one, the left hand one's a bit stronger, however. There's no this area on top where you can pen. And the lower plate is actually pretty strong as well. It's 140mm of armor, but it's pretty well angled, and it's going to be upwards of 200mm of penetration you're going to need to go through that. Side armor has this spaced armor, however it's not the Russian standard where it will somehow make it 500, 1000 bloody armor values. So you can, if you get to the side of it, try and aim for the bit below this top half. I wouldn't recommend trying to aim for this little bar, since the lower bit is actually weaker anyway. Just don't fire HE or heat into the side of it. And then the side of the turret can be quite troll if you hit the front bit, and I wouldn't recommend hitting the cupola because it's actually stronger than the side of it. And then when you come around to the rear, you can just pretty much hit anywhere. Don't try and aim for the top half of this turret though. Try and aim for the center bit here, like the lower center, and you'll be able to pen. But as you get further out, it starts to become a very, very strong angle, and you're going to bounce really pretty much most of your shots, even very, very strong tanks. And then we got the Japanese heavy, the Oh-Ho. I've done a Japanese heavy tank weak spots guide, so if you want to hop over to that video by just typing it in on my channel, that'll be pretty easy for you, and I might put it in the video description, so go and have a look at them if you want to just have a look at the right the way from tier, I believe, 4 to tier 10. I've got all the weak spots of the Japanese heavy tanks for those of you who might want to know. And then what we've got here is actually a really, really strong tank at tier 8. Especially if you don't know the weak spots. Now, the main things that you want to be aiming at when it comes down to this tank, there's this tiny cupola, which is very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to pen it. There's these two big cupolas, which alter the gun depression. As you can see, it has to kind of go up and above them when it wants to kind of get the gun depression. So if you can get straight ahead of this in something like an EOC AMX, it's going to have quite a struggle to actually be able to get its gun depression down to try and take you out. Now, the one thing that is important when you come up against this tank is knowing that you can hit these with 200mm of pen. I would definitely recommend firing premium if you can. And then you've got the side of the tank, which is quite hard to actually pen, especially since it's got this massive, massive plate of just spaced armor, which can be so troll, and just start ripping through your actual penetration value to actually go through the actual bit of armor. So I definitely recommend going for this top bit here. It's like this bar here. You want to be aiming for that. Side of the turret is 200mm of armor, so don't go firing at that. Try and hit this bit here, and you're gonna pretty much pen every single time. Don't try and aim for the cupolas since they're 200mm of armor. Make sure you're hitting the hull, unless you have got that amount of armor to penetration to be able to go through this armor. And then you come to the rear of the tank. It's got 150mm of armor at the rear, which is tier 10 standard kind of rear armor. And it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Just aim for this flat bit here, and you're going to most likely pen. If you can't pen there, then you're going to have a bloody hard trouble to actually penning this tank, unless you get to the side of it, which is actually weaker than the rear of the tank, which is kind of funny. But yeah, if you're firing heat, make sure you're not hitting this bit, and that is the thing that I see a lot of people doing, firing heat at this big flat area. They're like, oh, it's just a big flat area, let's just fire heat, but they don't realise that it's actually spaced armor, and it's going to absorb that heat round unless it hits the turret or this bit here. And that is what the Oh-Ho has to offer in terms of weak spots. Do not hit this cupola at the back. That's another kind of tip. Do not hit that because it's not a weak spot. I believe that is pretty much it for the tier 8 heavy tanks. So we've gonna kind of rush through every single one, just trying to get as many tanks into one video and trying not to make it a huge video so that you guys kind of feel bogged down. But in these kind of videos, we're going to be able to put the timestamps in the description below, and I'll be able to kind of give you a guide as to which point in the video that the tank that you want is going to be highlighted and shown within the thing. So if you ever have trouble with a certain tank from tier 8 to tier 10, as of right now, I've made guides of the tier 8 to tier 10 heavy tanks. the tier 9 to tier 10 tank destroyers, and I believe I'll go on to the tier 8 heavy tank destroyers as well in another video sometime soon. Probably within the next month I'll make another one of these to kind of help you guys out. So make sure that you like the video if you have enjoyed and it found it somewhat helpful, and it really helps out my channel. It kind of gets me out there a bit more. And subscribe using that big red button like below next to my name, and that will just keep you up to date with all the content I'm releasing every day. I'm going to be focusing mainly on modded tanks, but there will be other videos that I produce. I'm kind of trying to upload pretty much once a day now with different content, but I'll still be sticking to my 3 a week World of Tanks videos, maybe sometimes having 2 World of Tanks videos if I get busy, etc. And I'm hoping to get 5 videos out a week, which is going to be kind of a struggle, but I feel once we get into the routine it will be much easier, and I'm going to stop waffling on about that. Anyway, I hope you guys have had a good day, and I hope you guys will stick around for the next video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.